Hello there friends, welcome back to another episode of Generation Tech. My name is Alan. Today we continue our coverage of the background lore and information for the video game Star Wars Outlaws. In our last video we took a look at the state of the galaxy in 3 ABY and 4 ABY, which is when the video game takes place, and now we're going to continue on by talking about the various criminal syndicates. In the game, these will be the major factions that control territory, give you missions, and also allow you to build a reputation. The higher you're standing with a specific criminal syndicate, the more benefits you get. Piss them off and you might find yourself in a lot of trouble, especially if you're in their territory. We'll start off by talking about perhaps one of the most important criminal organizations in the Star Wars galaxy that you might have never heard of, the Crimson Dawn. It's quite unique as far as criminal syndicates go. Its leader's much larger ambition and political goals will basically shape how the criminal underworld works during the Imperial era. So, if you understand the Crimson Dawn, everything else starts making a lot more sense. The group started out as a loose band of mercenaries and thugs who looted and pillaged sparsely populated planets for resources. They were primarily driven by the petty pursuit of wealth. In those early years, there was still a relatively small and inconsequential criminal organization when you take a look at the larger criminal underworld, and they mostly picked on very weak and underdeveloped settlements where no one could really fight back against them. Actually, their actions helped create the pirate organization known as Emphy's Nest, which would later be a thorn in the side of their operations. The chaos and destruction of the Clone Wars would naturally create more opportunities for criminal organizations like the Crimson Dawn, with law enforcement and the Jedi focused more on pressing issues like war. The Crimson Dawn would soon expand in size and attract the attention of ex-Sith Maul. To understand the criminal syndicates during the Imperial era, you have to first understand Maul and his role as an organizer and leader of the criminal underworld. Maul was taken from his mother Talzin, a great Dathomiri witch, from a very young age to be trained as a Sith assassin and the first apprentice of Darth Sidious. He was extremely proficient at his job, and he would help the Sith seed chaos all across the galaxy. Step 1 in the Sith grand plan to destroy the Jedi. During the invasion of Naboo, after successfully defeating Jedi Master Qui-Gon Jinn in single combat, Maul underestimated Qui-Gon's Padawan Obi-Wan Kenobi and would be cut down to size. Maul would have to endure extreme suffering and trauma on his turbulent road towards making himself whole. He eventually found his legs during the middle of the chaotic Clone Wars and started rebuilding his life. During the galaxy-wide war, Maul would also find opportunity. He would start an organization known as the Shadow Collective in an effort to gain power and build a faction to serve his ambitions. Maul would target the various criminal organizations in the underworld, which were all growing in size, and he would use his own force powers and his brother's physical brutality and size to basically make everyone else fall in line.
We are the Black Sun!
Very well then.
They were the Black Sun. The Pike Syndicate would fall into line shortly after this awesome display of rearranging the Black Sun's leadership, and the Hutt clans would also fall in line. The much smaller criminal organization known as the Crimson Dawn would also join in the Shadow Collective. It got a lot easier for Maul to convince more organizations to join once he knocked down the first two big ones. And this was kind of the strength of Maul, and this was the benefit that he brought to the galaxy. It was already unprecedented for all of these major crime families to stop warring against each other, and it was extremely rare for them to actually work together in joint operations. In a strange way, by bringing order to all of these criminal syndicates, he limited the amount of random acts of violence that happened, especially in the Outer Rim, and this benefited people in the short term. In the long term, these criminal organizations would still exploit people and rob them of their money, so that wasn't that good, but basically Maul created a new faction, a united criminal organization. He would use the Shadow Collective to create his own personal kingdom by overthrowing the political weakened monarch of Mandalore. Even though Maul ruled Mandalore through puppet leaders, Darth Sidious ultimately found out what his plan was and brought him to heel. Not as his apprentice again, but simply as his plaything. The experience almost broke Maul, but he would eventually escape thanks to the help of Death Watch. This was a Mandalorian organization he had also co-opted, and he would basically crawl back to Mandalore and hide on his throne for the rest of the war, until that was also taken away from him during the climactic siege of Mandalore, right on the eve of Order 66. As the walls started closing in around him, again Maul told his most loyal lieutenants to go to ground and wait for his signal.
What's going on?
Maul just told the Syndicate leaders to go into hiding.
The galaxy will be remade, and in the chaos, we must seize what power we can.
Maul had a sense that something big was about to happen. He was, after all, force sensitive, and he had visions of great disaster and burning and fire. He also understood how evil and villainous his master Darth Sidious was, his former master. Maul would barely escape the siege of Mandalore with his life intact. Ironically, he would also almost be killed during Order 66, despite not being a Jedi. Everyone was a victim to Palpatine's machinations. Once again cast into the wild, Maul would start rebuilding, and this time he would gather his old criminal syndicate contacts and establish what was known as the Five Syndicates. An homage, perhaps, to the Five Families, which refers to the Italian mafia families that operated as a structured entity in New York City in the 1930s, after an intense civil war between the old Sicilian mob and newer American Italian mob restructured how the mafia worked. Anyway, the Five Syndicates included the Black Sun, the Crymora Syndicate, the Hutt clans, and of course, the Pike Syndicate and Crimson Dawn. Although Maul only directly ran the Crimson Dawn, the leaders of the syndicates were absolutely terrified of him and what he was capable of. Remember what Maul and his brother did to the Black Sun leadership during the Clone Wars. And so when Maul gave the directive that none of these syndicates would war against each other, they all listened, and it was actually very beneficial for all of them. They were able to basically concentrate on their own holdings, become more powerful and prosperous together. Maul would guide the Crimson Dawn from the shadows. He would personally train his proxy Dryden Voss to lead the organization, and for a while it appeared as if the Crimson Dawn was just like any other syndicate, focused on acquiring wealth and power. But there was always something a bit more professional, more focused, and deadly about how they went about their business. You see, Maul was creating a syndicate army. The first step was peace and unity. The second step was developing a central command system, an intel gathering organization. That's where the Crimson Dawn came in play. This wasn't like a normal gang. Although it dabbled in all sorts of illegal activity, its main resource, its main weapon, was actually information. They gathered it, they traded it, and they used it to control and manipulate the powerful individuals who ran the galaxy. It's similar to the Sith strategy employed by Darth Plagueis, the master of Darth Sidious, to operate from the shadows and pull the strings without revealing one's true identity. And it makes sense that Maul would do this because he does come from the lineage of Darth Plagueis and Darth Sidious. And at the same time, the Crimson Dawn acted like an intelligence agency. As a matter of fact, they rivaled the ISB at this time in how many connections and assets they had in the shadowy underworld. All of this setup was designed to do one thing, and that was to destroy Emperor Palpatine and his empire. But even the best laid out plans go awry sometimes, and Dryden Voss actually gets killed by his own protege, Kira. And then after that, Maul would die in a mission on Tatooine chasing after his old rival, Kenobi. With the death of both Dryden Voss and Maul, Kira, the street urchin from Corellia, a former friend of Han Solo, would take over the organization. And so at this point, the last piece of the puzzle would fall into place. Whereas Maul was driven by hatred and fear of the Empire,
You're all going to burn! We're all going to die! You don't know what you're doing!
Kira, who had grown up on the streets of Corellia as an orphan, had witnessed the suffering the Empire brought to its people firsthand. She saw the inequality and poverty created by the military-industrial complex, which had destroyed all of the other economic output on our world. She had a lifetime to reflect on how the Empire affected the common people, and she knew exactly how to start what essentially was a rebellion. She saw how the Empire stole resources, how they allowed criminal organizations to run rampant without any investment to local worlds or populations. She developed a much deeper and intimate understanding of why the Empire needed to be stopped. When Maul was in power, the Crimson Dawn and the Five Families were ruled by fear. Fear of an ex-Sith Lord's double-bladed lightsaber should they step out of line. When Maul's death reached these syndicates, the peace between all of these organizations broke down, and it was also assumed that the Crimson Dawn was more or less destroyed. But Kira had something far more potent than the order Maul created from fear. She had this political message she had been forming all of her life, this ideology she had created. She wanted the Imperial hierarchy to be destroyed so that Palpatine's stranglehold on power in the galaxy could be released to the masses, so that more organizations, more individuals had a chance of rising up and claiming a piece of that power structure for themselves. She wanted power in the galaxy to be distributed like an endless mountain range with many peaks, none dramatically higher than the other. A reset of the order of the galaxy. This is what made the Crimson Dawn and its allies more dangerous than other organizations. This ideology made them far more focused and dedicated. It wasn't just about getting credits, which is what most thugs and gangsters were after. Greed can only get you so far, but ideas like this can make one fanatic, willing to sacrifice their life for a cause, for a common goal. In this way, Kira's Crimson Dawn isn't all that different from the Rebel Alliance. Kira had been well trained by Maul. She understood the weakness of the Empire. She had been taught the arts of the Sith, how to manipulate the other criminal factions into getting what she wanted. In this way, Kira also belonged to the lineage of Darth Plagueis and Darth Sidious and Maul. She would create a great network of mercenaries, criminals from various factions, along with Imperial soldiers and officers, politicians, who she could call on to help her in her quest to destroy the Empire. In our deep dives of how the Empire affected the galaxy, we always talk about how the Empire was the greatest recruiter for rebel factions and dissident movements. And so, all Kira had to do was reach out and find these individuals and gain their loyalty. And so, in Star Wars Outlaws, if you do find the Crimson Dawn, their presence will be relatively limited. You most likely won't see them holding wide swaths of territory and patrolling around areas like the other criminal organizations. Instead, their main focus is going to be keeping small little offices, almost embassies, on these worlds, and keeping close to the power structure and economic structure of those worlds so that they could gain more assets through their secretive network of informants. She would also gather powerful allies, current and future enemies of Palpatine, and she did this always in secret. Kira would recruit Madeline's son, otherwise known as the Archivist, a historian of the Force. Kira respected the power of the Force, and she realized in order to understand Palpatine, she needed to know about his power. She even tries to convince the Archivist to go find Grandmaster Yoda and have him aid their cause. Kira would also seek out the Knights of Ren, dark side warriors who had been in hiding from Emperor Palpatine. She proposed an alliance against the Sith so that they could live free and without fear. There was also the Orphans, a group of orphans led by bounty hunter Chanath Cha, whose parents were murdered by Darth Vader. Kira could connect personally to this group because of their shared orphan past. And so, as you can see, the Crimson Dawn was not picky about who they chose to ally themselves with. As a matter of fact, they preferred to work with the dredges of society, the outcasts, individuals that no one really paid attention to because they oftentimes made the best spies, informants, and assassins. Now, the Crimson Dawn had a pretty outrageous plan to destroy the Empire. It all starts with the recent capture of Han Solo on Bespin City. His body was frozen in carbonite and taken by the bounty hunter Boba Fett to Nar Shaddaa. You see, Kira wanted to create a big gathering where she could attract all of the major players in the galaxy to one place where they could witness the rebirth of the Crimson Dawn beneath her control. Remember, most people thought that after Maul, that this organization was gone. And so the central piece to attract everyone there was actually Han Solo. The smuggler turned out to be the perfect bait because he had basically ripped off almost everyone in the galaxy, and many would love to have a statue of him. And so the Crimson Dawn would steal Han Solo from Boba Fett and announce that they were holding an auction for him. Everyone was invited. The various criminal factions, along with the Empire and the Rebel Alliance, would arrive on the Crimson Dawn yacht Vermilion as planned, and the Hutts would actually win the auction with a bid of 1 million credits. But then at the last minute, Darth Vader arrives and just takes Solo from Jabba, who has no choice but to agree. It was at this moment that Kira confronted Vader and demanded that he pay 1 million credits owed for Solo. This was a power play to show the rest of the gangs that Kira was not afraid, and that the Crimson Dawn was truly back and powerful. Kira even manages to duel Vader for a short period of time using the Teras Kasi martial arts technique taught to her by Dryden Voss. This was a martial arts technique used by non-Force sensitives to basically hold their own against Force sensitives. It was relatively hard to master, but you're only shocked in melee combat against someone as powerful as Vader. Kira holds her own for a few seconds before getting ragdolled by the powerful Sith Lord, but that was really enough for her and the Crimson Dawn to win respect from all of the various criminal organizations that were definitely not brave enough to step in and fight Darth Vader. Now, the story doesn't end here. There's one Hutt named Boku, who had actually been radicalized by Kira and the Crimson Dawn. Kira wants to create tension and chaos in the galaxy and use that to basically attack the Empire. And so she has Boku attack the Empire as they're transferring Han Solo's body to the Executor class Super Star Destroyer. The Hutt High Council would watch in terror as Boku orders the Hutt fleet to attack the mighty Imperial warship. It's truly a futile effort. These pirate ships were no match for the most powerful ship in the entire galaxy. I mean, this thing was like 19 kilometers long. And Kira gets exactly what she wants. This attack by the Hutts against the Empire creates friction between these two organizations. You see, the Hutts and the Empire had an agreement of sorts, an exclusive deal that no other criminal organization had, They were basically working alongside each other. The Hutts would provide the Empire all sorts of more sketchy services, from running black site prisons to giving them bounty hunters for assassination missions, and in return the Empire was protecting their territory, which was a huge plus. But this attack by Buku would basically destroy most of that, and Darth Vader arrives on the Hutt Council's barge and kills the entire leadership, except for Jabba. This created a huge opening for the other criminal syndicates, and right away they started vying for power because they believed that they could replace the Hutts' position alongside the Empire. And of course, Kira and the Crimson Dawn were more than happy to spread rumors that Emperor Palpatine was looking for a replacement for the Hutts, and was looking for a criminal organization that was dangerous and violent enough to help the Empire. And of course, all the criminal cartels start fighting each other. She also released the orphans on the Galaxy syndicates and had them carry out several high-profile false flag attacks against various syndicates. They left no survivors, no evidence that the Crimson Dawn were involved in these attacks, and this just makes things go to the next level. Thus started the Syndicate War, a period of great unrest and uncertainty for the criminal underworld that would last several months. Kira would use all of this chaos to move against the Empire, and at the same time, the Empire's resources would be stretched thin, dealing with all of this violence that basically came out of nowhere. Kira even manages to get close enough to poison the Emperor's own Royal Imperial Guard. Eventually, however, the Emperor would wisen up to her strategy, and he would force the criminal syndicates to stop fighting each other, and he would place a bounty on the Crimson Dawn's leader's head. Now, it's hard to say exactly when the game Star Wars Outlaws takes place. It could be before the Syndicate War, it could be during or after. I feel like either way, this is going to play a huge role in how these various criminal organizations behave and react to one another. The Crimson Dawn will definitely be a faction worth looking out for, but beware guys, even if their goals seem lofty and righteous, Kira is ruthless, even more so than Saw Gerrera. She's willing to do whatever it takes to win, even if it means sacrificing your ass along the way on some side mission that you choose to do. So be careful, and guys, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification button down below so you don't miss out on the rest of our coverage of the lore and content behind the scenes with Star Wars Outlaws. Well guys, I hope you enjoyed today's video. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification button down below so you don't miss out on the rest of our awesome content. As usual, my name is Alan, reminding you that my allegiance is to the Republic, to democracy. I'll see you next time.